once again to the Marty Heiser Show, where you always get the truth. You know, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world right now. There's unrest in the Middle East. The poverty level is increasing. There's concerns about the economy. You know, if you're a Boston Red Sox fan, I don't need to tell you how tough things are right now. But tonight on this show, I know a lot of times we talk about politics, who's right, who's not right. Tonight we have an incredibly uplifting show, a show that's going to be talking about something incredibly positive and something that you, yes you, put down that cereal spoon right now, sitting there in the kitchen. I know you're moving the channels around, and all of a sudden you come on public access and you go, "What the heck is this show?" This is the Marty Heiser Show, and you have something that's going to happen tonight, and that is a challenge to each and every one of you that's watching, because we want you to consider registering to be an organ donor. It doesn't take that much. As a matter of fact, all you have to do when you, well, we're going to get into it, but if you have a license, I don't know if we can get a close-up on this, but if you have a license and you register as a donor choice, you get a little heart right there. And then, heaven forbid, something happens to you, you will become a member of a long list of life givers, some of whom we're going to meet tonight, that are willing to donate their organs so that others might live. So that's the gist of the show tonight, and we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Commander Peter Kenyon.
Thanks, Marty.
And may I say, you are very dapperly turned out tonight.
Thank you very much.
Incredibly well done. Now, some of you might recognize the commander from when we had our show on the Navy SEALs. That was the night bin Laden was taken out the following week. We had a SEAL in training. We had Captain Drew Bissett with us, who is a SEAL as well. And you are a commander in the United States Navy, and you work with the SEALs as well.
I help support the SEALs in preparing candidates for the training they're going to have to undergo.
Excellent. Well, now, I want to ask you a couple questions, and then we're also going to meet Carrie Mull, and you are the program director for Donate Life Connecticut.
I am.
Right? And then we also have Dara Brooks, and you have an incredible story to tell about your son, and we're going to get to that as well. And Cheryl Edwards, and you work as well with Donate Life Connecticut?
Right. I'm also a coordinator that works with families who donate through New England Organ Bank.
And you are also a medical professional, right?
I am.
You were taking the pulse of our director before the show. Yeah. What's that? Okay, so are the mics on? Oh, okay. Well, we have to make sure that these mics are on. That'll be good. But as we go, there you go. I just want to start with Peter Kenyon, because you have a story to tell about your heart. You were suffering from heart failure, and what happened?
I had 2 major heart attacks, 2 weeks apart. Almost bought it at that point, and then went through a series of decreasing health, major operations.
What's the age at this point that you're going through this?
62.
62 years old. You're having heart failure.
I'm having the second part of the heart attack was a full code, which means I'm in full cardiac arrest, full pulmonary arrest. I'm essentially, technically, I'm dead. But Stanford Hospital's ER brought me back. It took a bit. I mean, they were getting ready to call, but somehow I'm a survivor, and I'm still here.
So 62 years old, your heart is failing. Now walk us through the organ donation and how that all happened.
Well, they first put me on a lot of meds to try and deal with the heart problem, because the attack killed about 60% of the heart muscle.
Okay.
Of the attacks. The meds, they put you on the lowest level of meds to start with, and I worked myself right up to the 4th level pretty quickly. Then they had to go in and put a defibrillator, implant one in me, which was open heart surgery. That is a shock box, which means if your heart, and they can monitor your heart.
Right.
If it goes into a bad rhythm, you get a shock. And it's right like you see with the paddles on ER or any of those TV shows. But mine's right on the heart and whack. I got to the point, I mean, it was happening enough, I could sense when it was going to happen.
Wow.
So if I was out someplace, like in Grand Central Station, which I was at one point, running for a train, I went to a wall and just got my back up against the wall because
you knew it was coming.
I knew it was coming, and if I was going to pass out, I wanted to be. So it starts firing.
Yeah.
I just slid down and sat down on the floor.
Now, let me back up. You've had a brilliant naval career.
Well,
You've been brilliant might be a bit much. You're married, children, grandchildren.
Married, 4 children, all adults, 4 grandchildren.
Okay.
Everybody's, mature, contributing adults. Great family, and I give all credit to my wife for that, Kathy, for that.
Yeah.
Because the job I had, I was traveling a lot.
Okay. But the point is, you're 62 years old, and you've got the whole world to live for.
Yes.
You're going into, your golden ages, and your heart's failing, and you have this zapper on there that keeps it going. But this isn't going to be the long-term solution.
No, and that didn't. Finally, in the final test, wasn't enough.
Right.
So they finally said, "All right, we're going to have to. Would you consider a left ventricular assist device, or LVAD?" which is an implanted heart pump. So I said yes, because I knew I was on a slippery slope.
Right.
They put that thing in. I was the last investigational recipient of that product. I had it for 3.5 years, and I wore it out.
Okay.
So they had to go in and put another one in.
So now you're 65, thereabouts?
Found out with 65.
Okay.
Put another one in.
I couldn't hear you. What?
No, I'm 65 and a half.
Moving the camera.
Right.
We put another one in. 4,
Hold the line, Kevin. Hold the line, okay?
40 hours later, I'm back in the operating room to get my new heart because it happened that fast.
Well, why don't you have
So now when the donor became available for the heart, how did that come about? Were you on a waiting list?
Yes, I was on a waiting, an organization called UNOS, United Network of Organ Sharing.
Okay.
It's in Virginia. It's tasked by the federal government with allocating organs to people who need them.
Okay.
And that's any organs: hearts, lungs, kidneys, livers, pancreas, lungs, small intestines, everything.
Wow.
And I'd been on the list in New England for a long time.
Right.
By that point, because I was in the hospital and because I was on a life support system, the LVAD, I was top of the list. But you have to, a lot of things have to fall in line. You have to do a tissue cross match to make sure that the blood, your blood, is not going to be rejected.
Right.
So they're testing everything back and forth. I was just very lucky. It took a long time, but I ended up with a heart from a donor who was a triathlete.
Wow. And you're 65 at the time.
I'm 65.
How old was the donor when
30 years old.
Wow.
Andy was 30 years old.
I mean, when you talk about a new lease on life,
oh boy,
that's pretty incredible. I have a caller on the air. Kevin, are you there? We have a picture of you. Your sister put up a picture of you here. So as we tell the story.
Want me to hold it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that'd be great. If you could hold it, that'd be great. And then your much more handsome son as well. Jordan, are you there?
I am.
Jordan, now let me just explain. Yeah, here we go. Now, this is Kevin Brown right here. And Kevin, can you just tell us your story with the show tonight? You're live on the air. It's a vast American audience for you down from Canada. But can you tell your story about your situation with your liver and how Jordan pulled through for you? What happened?
Well, it goes back about 42 years ago. I did an injection of intravenous drugs and contracted hepatitis C, many years before anybody knew what hepatitis C was. And in the early 90s, they coined, late 80s, early 90s, coined the phrase hepatitis C. And then in about 2002, I started having very negative effects, and liver functions were less than ideal, and tried to kill the hepatitis C. And from about 2003 to early last year, we just monitored it because the treatment didn't work. And in January of 2010, we found cancer in the liver, and I was given this diagnosis early mid-January, and was told we'll have a go at trying to find a liver donor and trying to do a transplant.
So how did the search go for a liver donor? And now we're going to hold up the next picture, which is Jordan. And by the way, Jordan, if someone was going to put your name in, Jordan Brown, on YouTube, would they be able to see some of your movies you've been in? Because, doggone it, you're a handsome guy, Jordan.
Well, I hope not, to be perfectly honest with you. But, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what you'd find. So, sorry, was that actually...
No, it's a question for you. I know I threw you. Jordan Brown is an aspiring actor, and so Google him. You'll see some of his work. He also happens to be a family member, and Kevin Brown is my brother-in-law in Canada. And then, Jordan, how did you end up getting the short stick in the matchup on the liver? How did that all come about?
Well, essentially, for me, I think it was at some point in January, I think, or it might have been early February, but we were over at my dad's place for dinner, and after we had dinner, he said he kind of had this announcement that they had found the cancerous cells in his liver, and that they were kind of going over all of his stuff, but once the surgical team in Toronto had gone over everything, they would determine whether or not he was eligible for to be put on the cadaver list for donations. So at that point, you'd be put into queue for any donors.
What's a cadaver list? What's the cadaver list?
Well, that'd probably be best to go over that. But basically, anybody who's an organ donor, on your license or whatever, if you happen to be an organ donor, then the cadaverous organs, when they get I don't know, use the term harvested.
Wow.
But
how did it all come about where you ended up giving half your liver to your father, and what was your thinking behind that?
Well, it was basically just a matter of like, there's a problem. What do we do? I think that's what I said was, okay, well, what's the next step once you said that? And so he said, we go through this process, and then if anybody wants to go through the donor process, the living donor process, then, the first stage is getting in contact with the team, and they get you an application, and you fill out all this paperwork, and, based on 1,001 different criteria, you may be eligible, and then you move on to the next stage of blood testing and a myriad of tests. There was weeks of tests. We're very, very fortunate to have a system here in Ontario where this is taken so seriously and taken, they're very, very good to you, and they move you through the system very fast.
I'm gonna hold up another picture. You remember your sister's wedding? This is the parking lot scene with some kind of, I'm sure it's maybe, some Polish Spring water or something like that, and cigars. You'll recall the parking lot?
I do recall.
Okay. What? Now, you have how many brothers, and why didn't they pony up a liver? How did you end up?
Let's face it. You want to go for quality. I got that in spades, Marty. You know
frankly, as this vast viewing audience views this one picture we're holding up, there might be some questions on the quality of some of those livers just from looking at the picture.
That's valid, Marty, but you got to consider one thing. When I was in school, not all of my brothers went to school school. So when I was in school, I couldn't afford to do a lot of drinking.
Right.
When I went to university. Yeah. So it was kind of my poverty was kind of a benefit to my major organs.
There you go.
So that's what put me up in the forefront, I think.
Had you had extra money. Well, Kevin, just walk me through a little bit of the emotions. I mean, I can only imagine you get this diagnosis with the liver, and it's not looking very good. And then you go out for a transplant, and you find that your very own son could donate part of his liver. What were you thinking? I mean, this is aside. This is an incredible human story.
Part and parcel of what we went through was when I was diagnosed with liver for about 7 or 8 years. I had ultrasound scans every 6 months, right, because we knew there was a high probability of me getting cancer. So when the call came and I was diagnosed, it was somewhat, it was a shock that it was actually true, but on the same note, it wasn't that surprising because we'd been constantly looking for it. And because I was diagnosed so early, most people that are diagnosed with liver cancer, they're walking dead people because your liver keeps on functioning right down to about 15%, even though it's not great. So when they diagnosed me and I went home, I'm thinking, they told me that I could take as long as 3 years to get a liver transplant, and I said, okay, and when I went home, and I'm telling my wife and daughter, my daughter's one of my daughters is kind of weepy sitting there, and my wife says, you know that you can get a live liver donor. And I said, get out of here. And she says, no, it'll grow back and puts it in. And I said, well, where in there did you hear that? And she said, Reader's Digest, so it's got to be true.
Wow.
And so when I said, I will go with trying to get a liver transplant, at the time that I kicked it into gear was around January 15th. And when I was accepted, and Jordan was entirely truthful about just about everything you can probe, stab, sample, and look at, and blood tests, and I went through like our Toronto General, where I had all this testing done. I was in there 2 to 3 times a week for about well into February. And they gave me a call on a Friday afternoon, I believe, and said, we're sending you a pager, and with your liver type, we figure we can have you into a liver in 6 months to a year. And Jordan had said to me, as soon as the opportunity comes up, send me the information. So they sent me the information. Within 2 hours, Jordan had his application in. Right. And I was extremely fortunate in that other brothers of Jordan and other brothers of mine have all had said, we'll contribute, and I had just a massive amount of support.
Wow. So now, physically, how are you feeling physically with your liver deteriorating, and how have you felt since you got the new liver? Has there been a dramatic improvement?
For years I've been walking around looking gray and very low energy, and within months, every time I saw somebody, the comment was, "You're looking incredibly healthy," and the liver made a difference in such a short period of time. It was just amazing.
We have in the studio Navy Commander Peter Kenyon, who works with the Navy SEALs, and his heart was deteriorating at the age of 62, and by the time he turned 63 or 65, after doing a lot of pretty dramatic things, he received a donated heart from a triathlete. And talk about a new lease on life. It's an absolute miracle what they're able to do.
It is. when the hospital team kicks into gear, the support from every aspect, every person of it was just absolutely phenomenal. And I know that Jordan had that same kind of support and just all out, and been under their constant care since then.
Jordan, you're still there, right?
Yep.
Jordan, you donate a liver to your dad. You got like dibs for the rest of your life, right? I mean, you need to borrow the car. You know, you get the last pork chop at family gatherings. How's that working out for you?
Marty, you know what meat at our family gatherings are like. If you're not in the room when it's being cut, and your hand's already on it, you don't have a chance. It doesn't matter what you've donated or not. But I think the way they said, how you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dad, but what did they say? They said that may have just given you another 30 to 35, 40 years onto your life. And so I figured, since he's only given me 28 up to this point,
Right.
like, there's got to be a bartering system here. That's got to count for extra points on the back end or something.
I agree. I mean, we got to crunch the number. We got to redo that will at the very least. Don't you agree, Jordan?
You know what? Look, from your mouth here, like I'm just saying. I'm not saying, but
All right. Well, we're going to close with that last picture of all you guys out in your somewhat disrobed tuxedos at that wedding, and I think that that's telling, because that wedding picture, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, if your son hadn't donated his liver, you might not have made it to that wedding of your daughter. Is that pretty accurate?
the accuracy would be that that wedding picture was on July 10th. I had a liver transplant on April 21st. I was a very high probability of not living 5 years, but I was dancing and just having a fantastic time. So Jordan's contribution to my life has been immense, and just it's an amazing event in my life, that's for sure.
Wow. Well, listen, thanks so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it, and God bless all of you.
Thanks, Marty. Take care.
All right, thanks, Jordan. Bye now. Wow. Well, you know, when we were talking about this donor transplant, there were, and you know what? This is Canada. So those are Cuban cigars right there. You know, those are the Cuban cigars. You can get them. I'm just saying. I mean, I know we got a blockade against Cuba. It really hasn't worked out. You know, Fidel Castro has lasted through like 7 presidents, you know, and we still can't smoke Cuban cigars. So we have to rethink that. But that's a whole other show we can talk about. But what I'm fascinated by with this organ transplant is just the human element of it. I mean, before we went on with that, we're in the middle with talking with you. But you're married, 4 kids, 4 grandkids. I mean, you had a lot of great years ahead of you. And if it wasn't for the miracle of organ donation and transplant, we wouldn't be sitting here and talking.
No, I'd be on the wrong side of the grass.
Yeah. And I think you lucked out completely because you got a triathlete's heart.
Yes.
I mean, anyone would make that trade, too.
Yes.
All right. All right, now, Carrie.
Yes.
So I want to get into the nuts and bolts of how this all works as well. Please tell us a little bit about Donor Life Connecticut, and I think we have a website which we're going to put up, and how people can get involved and how easy it is to become an organ donor.
I would love to. I brought a couple slides if you want me to show.
Excellent. Why don't we go right to the videotape? We have our crack crew here. Very high-tech show.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed that.
This is great.
A lot of preparation goes into this thing. This thing is scheduled right down to the millisecond.
It's terrific.
We got Canadians calling in. We got wedding pictures. We got a lot going on.
It's unbelievable.
Absolutely. So what do we got here?
So Donate Life Connecticut's mission is to raise public awareness about organ and tissue donation and educate people how they can register as a donor. So to become someone that actually saves someone's life, like Pete's donor. And the organs that when you register as a donor, you can register and donate your heart, lungs, liver, kidney, pancreas, and small intestine. And there's also tissues, corneas, heart valves, skin, bone, vein. And people that might receive these might be people that have had hip replacements, knee replacements. You can actually use donated bone to restructure different parts of the body. It can be shaped in all different shapes. Skin transplants, of course, are most well known for burn victims. Veins can be used for bypass surgeries, heart bypass surgeries. So there's a lot of people that have really benefited from tissue donation that we don't even realize, because it's organ donation gets a lot of the limelight because it's this life and death situation. But really, tissue is 1 million tissue transplants happen every year in this country, so it's much more common.
Let me just ask a question. I mean, it seems like there's different categories of donations. I mean, the most obvious ones would be is if you tragically die and they come upon you in a car accident or what have you, they see that you're an organ donor, then they can begin to isolate some of these things with them on.
Actually, someone that
someone
that's actually passed away in your scenario that has already passed on is ineligible to be an organ donor, because there's no blood or oxygen going to the organ, so they're no longer viable for transplant.
Okay.
Usually it's in a situation where a controlled environment, so someone is being monitored closely. So if that accident victim was brought to a hospital situation, tried to be brought back, and decided that this person is actually brain dead.
In a coma, and they decide do not resuscitate, that kind of thing?
That they're brain dead, there's no more brain blood going to the brain, they're not responding to any reflexes.
Right.
So someone in that case could be an organ donor.
Okay.
Someone in the case that of your scenario of passing away and being found can still be a tissue donor. You can be a tissue donor 24 hours after passing away.
This is a live call-in show, so we have a caller who called in. Do you have a question, caller?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. Marty, Judge Egan from Richfield, how are you?
Oh, Judge Egan, very nice to hear your voice. The show tonight is on organ transplants, and can you give us sort of a legal criteria how this works? Do you have to sign off on something, or how does that work?
Well, I don't really have a legal criteria, Marty, but I'm actually watching the show and appreciate what you're doing. I know you're not aware of this, but my brother literally died on the table in New York waiting for a liver transplant about 5 years ago. Wow. And I helped his wife at times take him down to New York through the process. And I think your panel can tell you that for a family, this is really a horrific experience.
Oh, I can only imagine waiting and seeing a loved one just deteriorate. It must be terrible.
Well, it's really unlike anything you've ever seen, Marty, because when you go to your doctor, and I was taking my brother Tom down to New York, when you see your doctor to qualify for the transplant, they have this point system, and you actually have to hope that you're getting worse instead of better, because until you reach a certain level, I don't know exactly what it is, you don't qualify to get the transplant. He unfortunately wasn't able to have the transplant that you were talking about with Mr. Brown, because anyone in my family would have agreed to do that, but he was apparently too far gone, so to speak, so it wouldn't work.
Wow.
But it's just really a horrific experience, and when people get their driver's license, there's that little box they can check for organ transplants.
Right.
And I just can't tell you, I'm sure your panel already knows this, just how important it is. And you can't imagine how many people are in this situation. When I went down to New York and went into the waiting room for the first time, I thought I was in an emergency room.
Wow.
As opposed to waiting for transplants. There are just people waiting for these all the time. So I don't know the legalities of it, and unfortunately we couldn't do anything for my brother, but I really hope that your show is going to do something for someone else.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the next slide we're going to get to, they're showing a baseball stadium full of people waiting. But listen, Judge Egan, thanks so much for calling in. We really appreciate it.
Hey, good talking to you, Marty.
Thank you. Yeah, he's what do they call it, judge of probate or something like that. He's a big yuckity-yuck in Ridgefield. All the best to you, Judge.
Take his call.
But I mean, here you go, another situation where his brother was waiting for a liver transplant and didn't have a happy ending in this case because I mean, can you imagine? It's just got to be. But back to your presentation, because I think what he was talking about, how many people are waiting, is
exactly where we're at.
Yeah.
So right now in our country, we have 112,000 Americans waiting for a organ transplant. And if you can imagine Fenway Park and Yankee Stadium packed,
right,
that only fills for 97,000 people. So 112,000 Americans are waiting for a transplant, and there's just not enough organs to go around.
So now, would it be a liver? Would it be a heart? Is it
any of those?
All
organs.
in would be 112,000 are waiting
for an organ. Yeah.
Okay.
And so this is the need. This is the gap that we have. Those blue lines represent the number of people that are waiting for organs, and the green lines represent the number of deceased donors that there are. So there's a major gap, and because of this major gap, 18 Americans die every day, just like the judge's brother that passed away because an organ simply wasn't available. So this is why our organization does what we do, is we try to educate as many people as possible to just consider that maybe organ and tissue donation is the right thing for them. And we brought with us today Dara and her amazing story, if you want to hear some of Dara's story.
I mean, I had a chance to read through the story, and as you do, we'll hold up a picture of your son, and if you could just walk us through what the story is. It's quite a heart-wrenching story.
Sure.
Oh yeah, and he also has one there too.
Well, my journey kind of started when I found out that I was pregnant with my son.
Okay.
My first pregnancy was a very difficult pregnancy, so they decided to watch me very closely when they found out I was pregnant again. And it turned out that my pregnancy was fine. I had no issues at all.
Right.
But they did schedule me for a C-section. And when I went to do the C-section that morning, they told me something was wrong. And I wasn't quite sure what was wrong, and they weren't quite sure what was wrong. They just said, we need to deliver your son immediately. They did deliver him, and when they delivered him, it turned out that the umbilical cord was around his throat. So if I had had a regular delivery, it could have been, this was 20 years ago now,
right,
it could have been very bad. So, you know, we went through the motions in the hospital. I'm about to go home. The nurses came in and said, you know, the doctors want to see you, and we're running some additional tests on your son, Tyler. So I went, we waited, my husband, my first husband and I, and we were in the room, and all of a sudden the doctors come in, and they basically say to us, we've already called your pediatrician. We need you to go immediately to see him on Monday. Please sign this affidavit saying that you'll go to the doctor on Monday. We go to the doctor on Monday. It was a tough weekend. We go to the doctors on Monday, and they basically tell me, I need you to go to Hopkins. At that point, we lived in Maryland.
Wow.
So we went up to Hopkins. When we got up to Hopkins, they were waiting for us, told us they had ran some tests, and that it could be a lot of things that were wrong with him. But the worst thing it could be would be something called biliary atresia. That's a disease at the time was affecting, if it affected a child, it was 1 out of 10,000 children. They didn't know what the cure was, what the reason was, and there was no real cure for it except for a liver transplant. We went through 2 weeks of testing, and after about a week and a half of the testing, we basically would go in and say, we hope this is what it's going to be today.
Wow.
And it got to the point that 2 days, I think it was probably maybe, there was 3 more tests to go, and they said there's no need to do any further tests. The doctors, all of us were crying, and it was biliary atresia. Basically, my son, we've kind of talked a little bit about it here, how at that point, getting a liver transplant was really, you needed to be very sick. My son, if you looked at him, was not really he didn't look sick.
Right.
There were children all around us who were very jaundiced, who had very large stomachs. He was a little green. He played around. Like most people would say, why is he here? No one knew he was really sick, except for his stomach was a little big. So we went home realizing that we were going to need to do a liver transplant. They basically said, I said, well, how far will we be on the list? You know, I started looking up. I knew that he had to be sick, and I knew that, you know, there were a lot of people on this list.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we're putting him on the list, but he's pretty far down.
Yeah.
And I said, well, why? Well, he's not sick enough, Dara.
Oh.
And so, you know, my husband at the time said, you know, there's some other options. And the other options was for us to do a living-related transplant. At that time, there were very few places doing it. There was a place in Chicago that was doing it. We decided to go there. But we had been going to Hopkins for the last 3 months at that point when we found out. And when they found out we were thinking about doing a living-related, they said to us, well, we're going to be doing it soon. And since at that point you really don't do a transplant until the baby's at least a year old, we decided to wait and do it at Hopkins because we weren't going to be a number.
Right.
We were also seeing some of the better doctors. I mean, some of them are talked about on television now. So we felt we were better off doing that. We did. There was a lot of tests, as they talked about earlier, that I had to go through. There were people questioning me, why do you want to do this? I had another child, so a lot of people were saying it was very risky, you know, to do something like that. Even my family was like, are you sure you want to do this? And, you know, my story was, I could possibly save my son's life.
Yeah.
So I did the living-related transplant, and initially we thought it went well. Turns
And
out...
this was your husband's liver?
No, this was my liver. It was my
okay,
liver.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It was my liver that we used.
So the same thing that we were talking about with my brother-in-law. So they take a portion of your liver and they transplant it, and then the rest of your liver grows back, and then the liver grows in the receiver as well.
Yeah.
I mean, for a lot of people, if they don't, that's news. You know, who knew this could work? Is it just a liver that this works with, or is this primarily?
Just the liver.
And it's interesting because every time I go for a sonogram or any kind of medical test and they see my scars, the first thing they do is say, oh, what is this? And I'm like, well, I was a donor for my son. And they immediately take the Doppler and put it over to just see if, oh, your liver really is completely back to normal.
Wow.
So
it grows back. I mean, that's incredible.
It is incredible. So, you know, it was fine for a little while. We really never came out of the hospital. Unfortunately, my son got sick.
Right.
And an option to get another liver it really wasn't an option. He went on the list and he didn't get a liver soon enough, and unfortunately he passed away. The other part of my story, though, is that there was a young lady who was 3 years old at the time. Actually, yeah, she was 3 years old at the time, who every once in a while when we would be in ICU, her mom and I would talk. And she was waiting for a heart transplant. And like Tyler, she wasn't as sick, but she would be in ICU.
Right.
I had heard she got very sick. And it turns out that I found out, you know, later that my son, we thought nothing would be available, and we actually went to them and said, hey, is there anything that's available so that maybe he can at least give, you know, an organ to somebody who may need it.
Right.
And it turns out that his heart was fine, and no one believed that his heart was like doing so well, but it did. And I found out later that the little girl who they used to play with in a window, you know, that she got his heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And what was the age of your son when he passed away?
When he passed away, he was 19 months.
19 months, and then the age of the girl who received his
She
heart?
was 3 at the time.
Wow. And your son's heart to this day beats in the chest?
As far as I know. Unfortunately, I'm not lucky enough to have any dealings with the person who has the heart.
Wow.
I do know of other people, and I haven't heard anything recently, but up to about 5 years ago, I did hear that she was doing fine and living a normal life.
I mean, it's obviously completely heart-wrenching to lose a child, but at some level, if you know your son's heart still beats and is giving life to another human, that's got to be some comfort.
Yep. Yeah.
The family that of the person that you received your heart from, did they know you?
Yes.
I mean,
It's like a second family.
I can't imagine the bond between. What were the circumstances surrounding the passing of the donor that they gave you the heart?
Andy collapsed on the bench, coaching a My-Day travel team, ice hockey, in Boston on a New Year's Day tournament. The family of his players thought it was New Year's Eve problem, but it turned out no, it was not. One of his friends was a doctor Andy had signed up to be an organ donor and made a big thing of it. Had brought one of his sisters down to sort of witness it.
Right.
And the family decided that they wanted to be an organ donor. Andy died of a brain aneurysm, which totally unexpected.
Yeah.
They didn't expect it, but he died of brain death.
So he died of massive brain aneurysm, but he made it to the hospital. They stabilized him.
Yes.
But they said that he's essentially passed away, no brain waves, whatever the measurement
Yes.
of it is. And then at that point, you
Then
were a
they
recipient of it.
the nurses, like Cheryl,
Which we're going to get to, Cheryl. Because someone's got to, you know...
come in and talk to the family
Right.
to see if the family wants to be, their loved one wants to be an organ donor.
Right.
In this case, Andy had already signed up to be for it. It was not a big question. They said, absolutely, go. I think, I was told it was like 26 people benefited immediately.
From various other organs as well?
And tissue.
My gosh.
And tissue.
So you've met the family?
Yes, I have.
He was married? You met his
No,
wife?
he was not married.
Okay.
He was single.
Right.
Just a
But you met his parents?
very
or-
outgoing. Yeah, I've met his parents. I've met his three sisters. I've met his brother.
Wow.
I've met the whole family.
Wow.
And I've played in a golf tournament that benefits a scholarship fund in his name at his prep school. The father recruited me to do the swim leg of the Duxbury Triathlon.
Okay.
He was going to do the
Now
bike
tell me
leg.
the stipulations of this triathlon, because I think it's pretty interesting.
It's a half a mile swim.
Right.
Then you do the bike,
Right.
which is 30 miles, I think.
Okay.
And then you do, or 13 miles, and then you do the run part.
Right.
And he had me recruit another fellow heart recipient.
But the whole point of the whole triathlon in this particular one is all of people that have received...
No, this was the regular thing. but
Oh, the regular, okay.
We were doing it in a relay so that there was a different person on each leg.
Right.
But we were getting a lot of publicity from the TV networks in Boston and the Boston Globe, and we were being interviewed all the time.
Well, I mean, it really, out of tragedy comes life.
Yes.
I mean, 65, you could have, that was it.
Well,
the chips were cashed in at that point.
They're very close. I mean, the first 3 medals I won swimming competitively, they have.
Wow.
I mean, I gave them to, the sister was there when I won them.
Wow.
And that night I took them off my neck and put them on hers.
Cheryl, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of this. I think of Mickey Mantle. You know, that was kind of, he has to be the most famous seeker of a liver. How is the list made? How is it determined? I mean, if there's so many people that are in need of this and so few donors, how does that all work?
Primarily, UNOS keeps the lists. They're somewhat of a clearinghouse, and they oversee everything.
Okay, what does that stand for?
United Network for
Okay.
Organ Sharing.
United Network for Organ Sharing. Is that a national network?
It is.
Okay.
They're in Richmond, Virginia, and they are charged by the federal government to oversee allocation of the organs.
All right.
So they do. They provide us with the lists. If I happen to be on site, they'll provide me with a list of recipients. And that list is for each organ, based on blood type and general size of the donor.
Right.
In each list is, it can be, I just did a case yesterday, and the blood group was A, and the liver recipient alone had 60 pages, and there's 25 names on a page.
Wow.
So, and that was just people that would
Okay,
fit
so you had
with
one
size.
liver
Yeah.
became available with type A blood, and 60 pages,
60
25
plus
each?
pages.
Someone help me with the math on that. That's a lot of people.
It's about
All right.
12,000.
Yeah.
So people are listed primarily by weight. When you get listed, you tend to go towards the bottom of the list. However, with each of the organs, like with Pete, he had come out and spoken with us, so we got to know him really well. So every time I was out, I would look to see if his name was on the list.
So you before he
we
received
knew
his heart.
Pete used to come out and talk with us in professional forums, talking about the need for organ donation, and he would tell his story, and that was while he was still waiting.
Wow.
So his LVAD that he talks about, you would hear in the room this clicking noise over and over, and people would be like, what is that? And we're like, oh, that's Pete. That's Pete.
Well, in your case, what was the list? How long was the list in your situation?
Very long.
I don't think that initially I was 1, then within a day I was 2. But once I was discharged from the hospital, and I was the first recipient of that machine to be discharged to home in New England.
Right.
I was dropped from a Category A to a Category B.
Okay.
You have to be a Category A.
Which means most critical, right?
Yeah,
I mean, the
you have to be
closer
be in the hospital.
Right.
And you have to, in most cases, you have to be on some kind of life support system, which the LVAD is.
Okay. Cheryl, what are the most common types of organ transplants that you
Kidneys.
do? Kidneys.
Kidneys comprise probably at least 3/4 of the list.
And again, with that situation, you can do a live kidney
Sure.
transplant, right? Because you have 2. And there was some guy in the NBA that had a kidney that was transplanted, or,
Yes. A couple of them.
He lost one or something like
Alonzo.
Are there,
Morning.
So
There's 3 or
Alonzo
4.
Mourning, yeah. Now, so you can do a kidney transplant, you can do a liver transplant. Are there any other organs that?
A deceased donor, someone who is in the hospital and has been declared brain dead,
Right.
and their death certificate has been issued, can save 9 lives.
Wow.
Their heart can help someone. Their lungs can go to 1 or 2 different people. Their liver can be split if you're relatively young and healthy. The larger portion of your liver goes to an adult or a larger child, and the smaller portion of your liver, like what Dara or your brother-in-law donated, can go to a baby.
Wow.
So you can actually help 2 people with 1 liver donation.
Huh.
Your kidneys can go to 2 separate people to get them off dialysis, and your pancreas can be transplanted so that somebody who requires insulin no longer needs to inject themselves with insulin anymore.
And then, and like they had in the display here, also skin grafting that can be used and other things. Caller, yeah, you have a question for the guest?
Yeah, I got a quick question. I know you're speaking about sports, and I recall several years back when Mickey Mantle received his liver transplant, and the situation with Mickey that created some controversy was that Mickey Mantle, needed a liver transplant, and somehow within a very short amount of time after he was put on the list, he received the liver. And people said, well, how did he get this liver transplant so quickly when other people have been waiting forever and they haven't received theirs? So I'd like to get their panel's opinion on that type of on that scenario. I'm sure it's because it was very well known. And can people get jumping? How has the list worked out now? Do certain people get preferential treatment over other people? Thanks a lot.
Good question. I even remember, it's one of these late-night movies I think I saw, but it was something like a Japanese mobster was in need of liver, and so they came over and they got one or something like that. But I mean, when you're talking about life or death, and fame, fortune, that can get you anything. What's the strike? Because like he says, the common understanding with Mickey Mantle is somehow he got to the top of the list because he could, was a really good baseball.
That's a great question. And I actually met Whitey Ford at a baseball game. I didn't know who he was, I'm embarrassed to say. But they were good friends, and they were promoting organ donation.
Yeah.
When we talk about people that are on the list and waiting, if somebody becomes critically ill, like Pete had gotten very sick, if you're not expected to survive 7 days without a transplant, you typically will go to the top of the list.
Wow.
Mickey Mantle happened to be at a transplant center, got very sick, his liver shut down, and he did move to the top of the list so that he could be transplanted. I mean, the point of transplants is certainly to be fair with wait time, but it's also to save lives. So if somebody is critically ill and going to die tomorrow without a transplant, it doesn't make sense not to transplant them because they're number 100 on the list if you can save their life and there's nobody sicker than them ahead of them.
Right.
So with Mickey Mantle, that's exactly what happened to him. And interestingly enough, there's a local woman from Danbury who came out with me to one of the Mickey Mantle baseball game shows, or we did a news show. She was in her 30s. She thought she had the flu and went to the emergency room at Danbury Hospital. And they sent her home. She went back a few hours later very sick, and she ended up at Yale. and Maureen ended up in full liver failure.
Wow.
Her family was told that she was not going to survive without a transplant, and she got moved to Yale on a Wednesday. Thursday night, her liver functions were so high that the lab couldn't quantify them anymore. And the family was told that if she didn't get a transplant within 24 hours, she would likely die, so she was put at the top of the list.
Wow.
So Maureen got her transplant Friday, which was Good Friday. And she was in the ICU for a few days. She was so sick that her liver had shut down so badly. It took a few days for her new liver to clear the toxins, and she woke up Easter Sunday.
Wow.
And they told her, Maureen, you have a new liver. And she's like, I what? Last I knew I had the flu. She didn't remember anything else. So Maureen's story, and she tells people all the time,
So she died
I'm not
on
rich,
Friday
I'm not
and rose
famous.
again on Easter morning. Now, this
Good
is sounding vaguely familiar.
But she says, I'm not rich, you have no idea who I am, and you'll never remember my name, and I don't have a lot of money, and I'm not famous. But I got sick really fast, and I got a liver because it was fair and square
Now,
to save my life. And that's what Mickey...
Do they call that triage? Would that apply to this situation where you sort of designate who can be saved, who's at the greatest risk of losing their life, and they move up and down? Is that?
Well, you move up the list as other people get transplanted ahead of you, unless you suddenly become critically ill and are not expected to survive. That's about the only way that you're going to move up the list.
On a weekly or monthly basis, do you have to deal with loved ones of family that are just desperate? I mean, a little bit like the caller who called in, and how do you deal? And doesn't that wear on you, or what's the toll that
I love
takes?
my job. I've been doing this for 15 years.
Okay.
And I met Carrie quite a few years ago, and a number of donor families like her that are just tremendous. I mean, I see this as a privilege to work with people who, at the very worst day of their lives, let me in, let me offer them that they have the option to save others, and then they let me do that for them and with them. I mean, how many people can say that they have a job that's just that great? And it is hard. I mean, you see people who are at their worst, but then we keep in touch with some of them, and some of them we get to see on a regular basis. I've known Carrie for 5 years now. And you see what good it does for them, for families that know that they're, like you said, their loved one lives on. My son's heart is beating in someone else, and a lot of times they meet the recipients and they just feel like it makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's the only good thing that comes out of a tragedy that you have no control over in most cases.
Wow. All right, Carrie, we want to go for the close here.
Okay, so
We got 5. What do we? And I want these websites. I want whatever people got to do to get with the Galdang program. It's not that hard. You get a little hard on your license. And,
in Connecticut, you can register 2 ways. You can register at the Department of Motor Vehicles when you renew your driver's license or receive your driver's license. You can check the box and you get that little heart like you showed in your license, so thank you.
If you get the heart, you feel very good about yourself. You feel somehow, superior to those, schlubs out there that are taking their kidneys to the grave with them.
And in Connecticut, you can also now register online at www.donatelifenewengland.org.
Okay, we got that up. We'll get it up.
DonateLifeNewEngland.org.
They're getting that.
And on that website, any New England resident can register to become an organ and tissue donor. And you can join over 1 million Connecticut residents that have said yes to donation.
A million? That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's about 41% of 18 and over. Yep.
Well, that's not bad. I thought it would be less than that. I mean, when I look at those bar graphs you have, it looks like it'd
not everyone can become a donor. So not everyone, actually becomes a donor, passes in that way.
But 41% of Connecticut. Are we an unusually generous state, I'd like to think?
No. We have states that are up in the 70s.
Oh, for the love of Pete.
We have some work.
What is it with you people out there? Come on, let's sign up and,
And if you go to Donate Life New England, you can also learn more about donation, some of the myths that you might have heard or television programs you might have seen, and kind of learn a little bit more.
The wives' tales about a guy that gets mugged in the city and comes out and he's missing his pancreas. Those are all, what do they call those? Folklore or modern? What do they call that?
Myths.
Modern myths.
Urban legends.
Urban legends, thank you. Hey, are you a donor? Organ donor? My
Don't
wife's
take your
a-
organs to heaven. Heaven knows we need them here.
That's the
there you
bumper
go.
sticker. Don't take your organs to heaven. Heaven knows we need them here. Wow. I mean, to me, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story about your son. I mean, you know, when it affects kids like that, it's just so heartbreaking. But at some level, I guess there's some comfort knowing that, you know, his heart at least continues. And your story, I mean, you're playing with house money.
Yes, I
And you
am.
got a goddamn triathlete.
Yes,
That's pretty good.
it is. It's very good.
And what I mean, as we kind of wrap up, what would you tell people how important it is to make sure that they are and that their loved ones are organ donors?
Well, one phrase that I like to use, which comes a little bit from what Dara's story was, is it's an organ donation is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
That whatever you do, it's going to continue. It's a legacy that most people don't have an opportunity to give.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit at that Navy SEAL dinner a couple weeks ago, but I mean, it just has to be at some sort of, you know, emotional, subconscious level. You feel your life slipping away when you have heart disease. You know, you have something where you feel it. You feel your strength sapping, and then all of a sudden you get this new heart, and you just have a new lease on life.
Absolutely.
Well, anyways, all right. Give us that email address one more time, or the website that they can go to.
DonateLifeNewEngland.org.
DonateLifeNewEngland.org. And for the love of people, we all live here in Connecticut. Come on, we're supposed to be a real liberal, enlightened state. You know, do-gooders, everything for the other guy. Become an organ donor. It doesn't take that much to do. When you're standing in line, do something positive at the Department of Motor Vehicle. Think about it. Sign up, and you can help keep a guy like Commander Pete Kenyon alive like that. Thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate you sharing your story, and thanks for putting up with all our last-minute changes and everything. This is, after all, public access television. Ain't no one getting paid here. So come in, join us next Thursday. We're going to have a really interesting pastor who's going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about same-sex marriage and some of these other things, because there's no topic we won't cover. We'll see you next week on The Marty Heiser Show. Thanks for joining us.